They buried me with her, thinking a secret could die under 20 feet of dirt. For 31 years, they were right. But a construction crew just made a fatal mistake. Stay with me, because the testimony I've held in my steel frame is about to bring down the most powerful man in town. The scream of machinery was the sound that ended my world of silence. It began as a deep, ground-shaking hum, a vibration that trembled through my steel frame and disturbed dust that hadn't moved in a generation. Then came the impact, a catastrophic shriek of metal on metal, a violent tearing sensation as something huge and sharp ripped into my roof. For the first time in 31 years, light flooded my interior, a painful, alien, blinding light. The roaring stopped. In the sudden quiet, I could hear the panicked shouts of men. Their voices were a shock after decades of listening only to the slow drip of water and the patient pressure of the earth. Some things are not meant to be found. They are driven into the dark, covered with soil and time, and left to the slow, cold process of being forgotten. I am one of those things. For 3 decades, I held a secret in my bones. I was a witness, a coffin, and a key, buried 20 feet beneath a forgotten stretch of county road in Blackwater County, Colorado. My world was a deep, humming silence, a patient waiting. Above, seasons I could no longer see came and went. The weight of winter snows pressed down. The spring thaws sent cold water seeping through the clay, tracing new paths of rust along my frame like tears. Roots, like blind, persistent fingers, probed my wheel wells and wrapped themselves around my axles, stitching me into the earth's dark heart. I held my breath, a lungful of stale, 31-year-old air, and waited. I remembered her. In the long, black years, her memory was the only thing that didn't rust. I remembered the sun on my hood and the familiar, gentle weight of her hand on my steering wheel. I remembered the song that was playing on my radio when the world ended. My name is a number now, a vehicle identification etched on a metal plate, a piece of evidence in a file. But I was once known as the Comet, and I belonged to Laura Vance. She vanished on a Tuesday in October of 1993. No scream, no sign of struggle, no sound, just gone. The case file gathered dust in police storage, officially open, but practically forgotten. For 3 decades, her name became a ghost story whispered in the town of Stone Creek, another tragic mystery swallowed by the forest, a wound on the community that had scabbed over but never truly healed. They say the truth has a way of rising to the surface, that the earth, in its own time, gives back what it takes. I am proof of that. The screaming of the excavator has stopped, replaced by the hushed, urgent voices of the living. Everything stopped. Before I was taken from the light, I was part of her happiness. That last afternoon, the sunlight was golden and low, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the road. She was happy. I could feel it in the gentle way she handled me, the way her foot rested on the accelerator, light and steady. It was the last good day, the last hours of peace before the world ended, before she was taken from it and I was taken with her. My memory of her from that day is not a single image, but a collection of sensory details, preserved against the slow decay of time. Laura Vance was 24 years old, a quiet woman with a loud, sudden laugh, the kind of person who'd watch a storm roll in for an hour without blinking, just to see how the clouds folded into themselves. She worked at the local library, a job that suited her patient and observant nature, and she was saving money to move, to see a world beyond the jagged peaks that circled Stone Creek like a wall. She often tapped her fingers on my dashboard, a nervous, rhythmic beat that I had come to know as her thinking dog beat. That Tuesday, the rhythm was faster than usual. We drove to the market in Stone Creek earlier that day, my tires crunching over fallen leaves that were the color of fire. She bought apples and a loaf of bread, simple things for a simple evening. We went to the post office next. She mailed a letter to her sister in Oregon, a thick envelope that I could see on the passenger seat beside me. She hesitated for a moment before dropping it in the blue metal box, a flicker of something, doubt, fear, crossing her face before it was gone. That last Tuesday was a day of perfect, unremarkable normalcy, a fragile veneer over something tense that coiled just beneath the surface. My memory of her is not just of the good things. It's the faint scent of cinnamon from the coffee she always kept in my cup holder, mixed with the sharp, metallic smell of her fear. It's the weight of her worn leather jacket, tossed on the passenger seat, a comforting presence. It's the sound of her voice, clear and bright, singing along to a song on my radio, slightly off-key, a brave attempt at a peace she did not feel. She loved the autumn. She would drive with the windows down, even when the morning air was sharp enough to bite. She'd say it was the only way to truly smell the world changing. Before the silence, there was sunlight. There was the smell of pine and damp earth. And there was a young woman driving toward an evening she would never reach. The last thing I remember is the sound of a shovel striking rock, a sharp, grating scrape, followed by the thud of heavy soil landing on my roof. It was a sound of finality, of a door being sealed forever. We had plunged deep into the woods, away from the sun, my tires struggling for purchase on a rough dirt track I did not recognize. Before the digging began, there was only the cold, metallic scent of the man beside her, and Laura's impossible stillness. She was there, but she was gone, a silent passenger in her own abduction. His hands were rough on my steering wheel, his foot heavy and unsteady on my accelerator. He was a man built for disappearance, and he had used that gift with terrifying precision. This was not a shortcut. This was the end of the road. We had been on the old mountain pass, a ribbon of asphalt that wound through miles of pine and aspen. The music was playing, a familiar folk song that spoke of leaving and loss, an ironic soundtrack to what was about to happen. Then, a flicker of red and blue appeared in my rearview mirror, a sudden predator in the calm afternoon, a police car. Laura's posture straightened, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. She was a careful driver. She pulled me over to the gravel shoulder, my engine idling in a soft, steady rhythm that was the last moment of normalcy we would ever know. The officer who approached my driver's side window was a silhouette against the blinding afternoon sun. I couldn't see his face, only the crisp lines of his uniform and the glint of his badge. He was a figure of authority, a symbol of safety that had been twisted into something monstrous. His voice was calm, professional. He said her taillight was out. A lie. I knew my own body. My lights were fine. The lie was a key, turning a lock on a door she didn't even know was there. Laura was polite, her hands steady as she reached for her registration in the glove box. She trusted the uniform. She trusted the system it represented. That was her undoing. The moment her gaze was diverted, my passenger door was pulled open. It happened so fast. A man, not in uniform, slid inside. I felt the sudden, jarring weight on my suspension, a violation. Laura made a sound, a choked gasp of surprise that was cut short. I heard a muffled struggle, the rustle of fabric, a sharp, metallic click. Betrayal. The officer at her window did not move. He simply watched, a sentinel of indifference. The change came without warning, a brutal and efficient erasure of a young woman's future, executed on a lonely road under a perfect autumn sky. The world moved on without us. Her family grieved. The case file gathered dust in police storage. But I remained, a time capsule of a final moment, waiting for the one thing that could break the spell, a disturbance. Above me, I could sometimes feel the faint vibrations of the world, a heavy logging truck on the distant highway, the low rumble of thunder before a storm. But mostly, there was only the immense, patient weight of the soil and the silence of being forgotten. The air inside me grew thick and heavy with the smell of old vinyl, stale air, and the ghost of cinnamon. I held Laura's last day inside me like a photograph preserved in amber, every detail frozen. The half-empty coffee cup in the holder slowly grew a film of pale green mold, a small, contained ecosystem of decay. The thick lettershed meant to rewrite lay on the passenger floor, the moisture in my sealed cabin causing its ink to bleed into a watercolor of meaningless blurs. Her final words to her sister, lost to the damp and the dark. In the second year, the life of the world above began to intrude. A network of roots, thin as thread, discovered my tires. They were persistent, growing thicker over the decades, wrapping around my axles and anchoring me to the earth, making me a part of the landscape's deep secret. Small burrowing animals sometimes found shelter in my undercarriage, their frantic heartbeats a temporary flutter of life in my silent world. They were my only company. A small, persistent leak began in my trunk, a steady drip, drip, drip that became the only clock I knew. Water found its way in through my seals, tracing cold paths down my windows and pooling on my floor mats. It carried with it the scent of damp earth, of decomposition, the smell of time itself passing. The first season was the slow compression of the soil around my frame, a crushing embrace that made my metal groan in protest. Time, in the dark, is not measured in days or years, but in sensations. It is a slow, relentless pressure, a gradual fading, a patient waiting for a sound that may never come. For the first time in 3 decades, I was moved, hoisted from my grave by heavy straps that groaned under my weight. I felt the pull of gravity again, a strange and unsettling sensation after years of being held only by the earth. The world rushed back in, a dizzying flood of light, sound, and air. It was too much, too loud, too bright. As the sun began to set, casting the same long, golden hour shadows I remembered from that last day, a man in a trench coat stood looking down at me, his face grim, his eyes patient. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm, a stark contrast to the chaos around us. "Let's get her out. Take her to the lab. Gently." They treated me not as a piece of wreckage, but as a sacred site, a vessel of evidence. The careful, methodical sounds of an official investigation had replaced the panicked shouts of the construction crew. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape that fluttered in the evening breeze. I heard the crunch of boots on the soil around me, the low murmur of professional voices speaking a language of forensics and procedure, the click and whir of cameras capturing my decay from every angle. They worked for hours, carefully brushing away the dirt that had been my blanket for so long, treating every clod of soil as a potential clue. The quiet of my tomb was shattered forever. After the initial impact, there was a long, stunned silence from above, broken only by the idling of the massive excavator that had torn me from my slumber. Its steel bucket had ripped a jagged wound in my roof, exposing my passenger seat to the sky for the first time in a generation. Then, a voice, laced with the kind of disbelief that precedes horror. "Boss, you need to see this. It's a car. My God, there's bones inside." That was the moment the silence ended. The disturbance, when it came, was violent. It began as a low, deep trembling in the earth, a vibration that shook the dust from my dashboard and rattled my rusted frame. It grew into a rhythmic, ground-shaking roar that was terrifyingly close, the sound of an approaching beast of steel. Then came the impact, a catastrophic shriek of metal on metal as something huge and sharp tore into me. And then there was light. He was the unwavering seeker, the kind of man Laura's family must have prayed for all those years ago. He was the one who would translate my silent testimony into the language of justice. Kincaid himself supervised the opening of my doors, which protested with a shriek of rusted hinges, as if reluctant to give up their secrets. He leaned in, his face solemn, the bright fluorescent lights reflecting off my faded paint. For a moment, I felt like he was listening, not just looking, trying to hear the echoes of what had happened inside me, the ghost of a song on the radio, the sound of a final, stolen breath. His team began their painstaking work. They photographed me from every angle, their flashes like cold, clinical lightning. They took soil samples from my wheel wells, hoping the earth I carried could tell them where I had been. They carefully vacuumed my carpets, collecting fibers and fragments of debris that had been dormant for a generation, each speck a potential witness. The soil was clay, heavy and low in oxygen, he explained to a younger officer, his voice a low murmur that filled the vast space. It acted like a vacuum seal. Everything inside could be a clue. Everything. He treated me with a methodical patience, circling me slowly, his gaze missing nothing. He didn't see a rusted car, a piece of scrap metal pulled from a premature grave. He saw a crime scene, perfectly preserved by the very dirt that was meant to conceal it. I learned his name from the hushed conversations that echoed in the bay. Detective Grant Kincaid. He was older, his face etched with the kind of lines that come from looking too long into dark places. He wasn't on the original case. He would have been a rookie then, fresh-faced and unaware of the secrets the county could keep. Now he was the head of the cold case unit, a man who carried the weight of other people's lost stories like a second skin. My new world was a cavernous, brightly lit garage that smelled of antiseptic and oil, a forensic bay. Here, I was the center of a new kind of attention, a silent celebrity under the harsh glare of examination lights. People in white coats moved around me with a quiet reverence, their tools precise and their movements deliberate. The man from the excavation site was there, his trench coat a stark contrast to the sterile environment. He was my new guardian, my interpreter. I had carried her fear with me all this time, sealed in that small, damp book. Detective Kincaid read the passage aloud in the quiet of the bay, his voice steady.
"MT," he repeated, the initials hanging in the sterile air like smoke. She wasn't running a shortcut. She was running from someone. The final entry was different from the rest of the journal, which was filled with her daily thoughts, observations about books, and plans for the future. The handwriting in the last entry was rushed, agitated, the pen strokes digging into the fragile paper. "He knows," she had written. "MT knows I have the ledger. He called last night, told me to be careful, said people were watching the library. I feel like I'm going crazy. Am I making this up? He sounded so scared for me." The most significant discovery came from under the driver's seat, a place of mundane clutter turned sacred ground. It was a small, spiral-bound notebook, its pages warped and stained by moisture. Laura's journal. Kincaid and his team spent a week carefully separating the pages, their movements as delicate as those of an archaeologist, using specialized dryers to make her faded words legible once more. Detective Kincaid bagged the button himself, his expression intense, his gloved fingers treating the small object with the reverence of a holy relic. Tucked deep within the springs of my passenger seat, a place no one would think to look, a forensic technician found two things that did not belong to Laura. The first was a single, long strand of dark hair, a silent witness tangled in the fabric. It wasn't hers. The second was a small brass button, the kind from a man's heavy work coat, not the crisp fabric of a police uniform. From my glove box, they retrieved Laura's vehicle registration and a folded road map, its creases permanent from years of disuse. A single pinprick marked a small town in Oregon, where her sister lived, a destination she would never reach. The secrets I had kept for so long, the small, mundane objects that were now imbued with a profound and heavy significance, began to give themselves up under the patient hands of the investigators. They worked with a quiet focus, their actions a kind of ritual, an exorcism of the silence that had clung to me for 3 decades. Marcus Thorne, MT. A name that was not on any of the original suspect lists from 1993. A man who, in the 31 years since Laura's disappearance, had woven himself so deeply into the fabric of Stone Creek that he had become the town itself. He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the county, a pillar of the community. And suddenly, he was the primary focus of a 30.1-year murder investigation. The breakthrough came not from a lab, but from an act of love and remembrance. The Oregon State Police contacted Laura's sister, now a woman in her 50s who had never given up hope. She had kept every letter Laura had ever sent her, a painful archive of a stolen future. The last one had arrived 2 days after she vanished, a ghost speaking from the past. She faxed a copy to Kincaid. In it, Laura's neat handwriting spelled out her fears. "I found something by accident," she wrote, "tucked into a donated book at the library. It's a business ledger.
It looks like Marcus Thorne is using his logging company to launder money for some very dangerous people. I made a copy. I don't know what to do. He's such a pillar of the community. Everyone loves him. Am I wrong? The investigation into MT was more difficult. Kincaid's team compiled a list of every person in Laura's life with those initials. It was a slow, painstaking process of elimination. Friends, library patrons, distant relatives. The list was long, a testament to a life fully lived, now reduced to a set of cryptic clues. Every name was a dead end, a path that led back to the same cold silence. I could not follow Kincaid out of the forensic bay, but I was the epicenter from which his investigation radiated, a silent, rusted compass pointing the way. The strand of hair and the brass button were sent for DNA and material analysis, modern science reaching back across 3 decades. Laura's journal, with its cryptic initials MT, became Kincaid's Rosetta Stone. He reopened the original 1993 case file, a dusty box of forgotten reports and faded photographs. The trail was ice cold. He found that the officer who had supposedly initiated the traffic stop, a man named Deputy Miller, had quit the force 2 weeks after Laura's disappearance and moved out of state. He was never formally questioned. It was a loose thread, a detail so obvious it felt like a deliberate omission. Kincaid put out a bolo alert for him, sending a name out into the world, hoping for an echo. The silence that had settled over my steel frame for 30 years was the same silence Kincaid now faced in the streets of Stone Creek. The town wasn't just hiding a secret, it was actively resisting the truth. He knew the ledger Laura had mentioned was the key, the physical proof that could shatter the wall of denial. But the original was gone, and the copy she had made was likely buried with her, lost to the elements. He felt the pressure of the town closing in around him, a quiet, suffocating force born of complicity and fear. Thorne's logging company provided half the jobs in the county. His name was on the library, the park, the scoreboard at the football field. To speak against him was to risk everything, to become an outsider in your own home. It was a collective amnesia, a silence built on a foundation of fear and misplaced loyalty. When Kincaid began asking questions about Marcus Thorne, doors that had been open were politely closed. People's memories grew foggy, indistinct. Conversations stopped when he walked into the local diner. The former police chief, long retired and living by a lake, claimed to have no recollection of the specifics of the case. "It was a long time ago, detective," he said, his eyes evasive, never quite meeting Kincaid's gaze. Tragic, but these things happen. Armed with a name, a ghost from a 31-year-old letter, Detective Kincaid returned to Stone Creek. But the town that had once mourned Laura Vance, that had held candlelight vigils and tied yellow ribbons around oak trees, now seemed determined to protect its secrets. Marcus Thorne was more than a businessman. He was the town's benefactor, its patriarch. He had built the new wing of the hospital. He sponsored the high school football team. He had served on the town council for 2 decades. He wasn't just a pillar of the community. He was the foundation. He was untouchable. Every answer Kincaid sought was like a knife made of fog. You could feel the edge, but you could never see the blade. The conclusion from the forensic audio analyst was unequivocal. The voice on the 31-year-old tape, the calm, authoritative voice of the man who had stood outside my window and sealed Laura's fate, was Marcus Thorne. Kincaid had his ghost. He then obtained a warrant to record Thorne's voice during a routine interview about his business dealings, a conversation about timber yields and profit margins. He played the two recordings, separated by more than 3 decades, for an expert. The cadence, the pitch, the unique vocal fingerprint, they were a perfect match. Kincaid listened to the recording a dozen times, the words echoing in the sterile lab. He brought in former Deputy Miller, whom the Oregon police had located working as a security guard in a shopping mall, a ghost of a man haunted by a choice he made 31 years ago. Miller confessed immediately, the words tumbling out in a torrent of guilt and relief. He said Thorne had paid him $5,000 to make the stop and look the other way. It was more money than he'd ever seen. The man in my passenger seat, Miller said, was one of Thorne's foremen, a hard man named Silas Croft, who had died in a convenient logging accident just 5 years later. It wasn't music. The tape had been running when Laura was pulled over. The song had ended, but the cassette's cheap mechanism had kept recording, capturing the sounds of her final moments. Over the soft hum of my engine, a man's voice could be heard, distorted by time and decay, but clear enough to understand. "Just turn it off, Laura. Turn off the car and give me the ledger." A second voice, closer from the passenger side, said, "Do what he says. No one has to get hurt." While Kincaid fought against the town's suffocating silence, his forensic team was fighting to hear a voice from the past. My original radio and cassette player, relics from another era, had been carefully removed from my dashboard and sent to a specialized audio lab. Inside was a cassette tape, a homemade mix of folk songs Laura had often played, its plastic casing warped from years of damp. The lab technicians worked for weeks, their patience a form of reverence, cleaning the delicate magnetic tape and using advanced audio enhancement technology to filter out the decades of decay. Slowly, painstakingly, they managed to restore the last few minutes of audio. Monsters aren't just found in the shadows of lonely mountain roads. Sometimes they stand on podiums, accepting plaques, their hands clean while the dirt is still under their fingernails. He used his power and influence not to build, but to bury. He buried Laura, and he buried me. The betrayal was absolute. He hadn't just killed a woman to cover his crimes. He had murdered the very spirit of the community he claimed to protect, twisting its loyalty into a shield for his own darkness. She was going to ruin everything, Thorne told Kincaid, his voice cold and devoid of remorse. The voice from the tape now attached to a face. "I built this town. I gave people jobs, security. She and her pathetic little ledger were a threat to all of it. I did what I had to do to protect my community, to protect my legacy." He confessed everything. Laura, an observant and intelligent library clerk, had indeed found his ledger, detailing a massive illegal logging and money laundering operation connected to an out-of-state crime syndicate. In her innocence, she had confronted him, not with malice, but with a naive belief that he, the town's great benefactor, was being taken advantage of by his business partners. She thought she was helping him. She had underestimated the rot that hid beneath the polished surface of his philanthropy. The arrest of Marcus Thorne sent a shockwave through Stone Creek, a seismic event that cracked the foundations of the town's identity. He was apprehended at a town gala celebrating his latest contribution to the local library, the very place Laura had worked. Kincaid and 2 uniformed officers walked onto the stage just as Thorne was accepting an award. The polite applause faltered, then died completely.
replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. The man who had built the town was revealed to be the monster who had haunted it for 3 decades. In the face of the irrefutable audio evidence and Deputy Miller's confession, Thorne's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. The mask fell away, and the thing that had lived behind it for so long was finally exposed to the light. My purpose is fulfilled. Her name is Laura Vance, and because of a car that refused to be forgotten, no one in Stone Creek will ever forget her again. My rust is a testament to the time that has passed. My silence was a testimony waiting to be heard. I had carried Laura's story, her last brave act, through the long, dark years, until the world was finally ready to listen. Her sister came to see me once, after the trial was over. She stood outside the chain-link fence of the impound lot and just looked at me for a long time. She didn't cry. She just nodded. A silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding between a grieving heart and a silent witness. She understood what I was. Not a tomb, but an ark. Sometimes, a mechanic from the police garage works nearby, his radio playing the local news. Through the thick blue tarp that now covers me, I can hear them talk about Laura Vance. They don't call her a victim anymore. They call her a hero. They speak of her quiet courage, the library clerk who saw something wrong and refused to look away. A scholarship has been started in her name at the local high school for students who demonstrate integrity and bravery. The town of Stone Creek is left to grapple with the knowledge that the man they revered was a killer, his generosity a mask for his greed, his legacy built on a foundation of lies and a young woman's bones. My journey ended here. I sit now in this secured lot, a numbered piece of evidence. Exhibit A. Justice has been served, but it came late, carved from stone and sorrow. Marcus Thorne will spend the rest of his life in prison, his name now a synonym for betrayal. Former Deputy Miller received a lesser sentence for his cooperation, a life sentence of a different kind, one lived with the ghost of his cowardice. I am no longer a vehicle, no longer the comet. My case number is stenciled in white paint on my windshield, a final, cold brand. My life on the open road is a distant memory, a faint echo of sunlight and freedom. The story of Laura Vance reminds us that some secrets are not kept by locks and chains, but by a silence carved from fear and loyalty. For 31 years, a town held its breath, hoping the earth would keep what it was given. But the truth doesn't need a human voice to speak. Sometimes it speaks through rusted steel, a faded journal, and the relentless work of those who refuse to let the silence win. Laura is no longer a ghost story whispered in Stone Creek. Her courage is now her legacy, a scholarship that ensures her name will be etched in light for generations to come. What do you think? How responsible is a community when it chooses to protect a monster in its midst? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Thank you for watching Deep End Stories. Don't forget to subscribe to Deep End Stories and hit the notification bell so you can help us make sure no name stays forgotten.